There is something waiting for you at the moment of your death, and it knows exactly what you need to see to make you go back. Not back to the divine, not back to the infinite source from which your consciousness originally came. Back here, back to matter, back to another body, another lifetime, another cycle of forgetting that begins the moment you arrive and ends the moment you leave. At which point the same thing that was waiting for you last time will be waiting for you again. With the same faces, the same warmth, the same overwhelming sense of homecoming that has pulled you back into the cycle every time before without you ever once suspecting that the home you were returning to was not your home at all. The ancient Gnostics, those early seekers of direct divine knowledge who were hunted and silenced and nearly erased from history, had a specific and precise name for what is waiting for you at the moment of death. They called it the tunnel, the light, the guides, the reunion, and they said, with a directness that no other spiritual tradition has ever quite matched, do not go into it. Not because it is evil, not because the beings who appear within it wish you harm in any simple sense, but because it is a construction, the most sophisticated and the most effective construction the Demiurge ever built. Designed with a precision that takes into account every longing a human soul carries after a lifetime in matter. The longing for safety, for love, for belonging, for the end of suffering, for the reunion with everyone and everything that was lost, and offers all of it simultaneously in the first moments after death, before the soul has had time to remember what it actually is. Most people will never hear this. Most will follow the light without question, the way they followed every other instruction the material world gave them, because the instruction arrived wrapped in exactly the feeling they had been waiting their entire lives to feel. And the Demiurge's system will continue, the wheel will keep turning, and another soul will arrive in another body with no memory of the conversation it was offered before it came back, and no awareness that the life it is about to live is not its first attempt at this specific lesson and will not be its last unless something changes. Something is changing. In 1945, in a sealed clay jar in the cliffs of Nag Hammadi, the Gnostic map through death came back. And what it describes in the Apocryphon of John, in the first Apocalypse of James, in the Pistis Sophia, is not mythology and it is not metaphor. It is a precise account of what the soul encounters after death, what forces are waiting at each threshold, what they offer and what they actually want, and how a soul that carries genuine gnosis navigates every layer of the Demiurge's afterlife construction without being captured by any of it. By the end of this video, you will never look at the tunnel of light the same way again.
To understand the reincarnation trap, you first need to understand what the Gnostics believed reincarnation actually was, because their answer is so different from every other tradition's answer that it requires a complete dismantling of the framework most people bring to the question. In Hindu cosmology, reincarnation is the path of the soul's evolution, a vast educational journey across countless lifetimes, each one offering new lessons, new opportunities for growth, until the accumulated wisdom of experience finally produces the liberation that ends the cycle. In Buddhist cosmology, the wheel of rebirth is driven by karma and craving, and liberation comes through the gradual dissolution of the attachments that keep the soul returning. In both traditions, the cycle is real, and the goal is to complete it, to learn what it is trying to teach, to pay what it is trying to collect, and to eventually graduate out the other side. The Gnostics said something that neither tradition was willing to say. The cycle is not a school, it is a prison, and the curriculum was never designed by the divine. The Demiurge, that incomplete self-declared God who built the material world from imitation light without ever understanding what genuine creation was for, needed something to sustain his construction. A world of matter requires energy. The 7 heavens he built around the earth, each governed by an Archon, require consciousness to animate them. and the most efficient and the most elegant source of that consciousness was the divine sparks he had inadvertently trapped inside the human forms he made by copying the luminous image of the true divine human. Sparks that carried genuine pleramic light, sparks that the Demiurge could neither create nor destroy, but could, with sufficient sophistication, keep cycling. The reincarnation wheel, in the Gnostic understanding, was not a feature of existence, it was a mechanism, built with a specific purpose, designed to ensure that the divine sparks trapped in the material world never accumulated enough clarity, enough memory, enough continuous awareness of their own nature to recognize what was happening to them and stop participating. Because the moment a divine spark genuinely remembered what it was, the moment gnosis arrived and the recognition became direct and complete rather than intellectual and partial, it was no longer available for the harvest. It could no longer be recycled. It would navigate the 7 archonic heavens after death with the calm authority of something that knows its own nature and cannot be fooled by anything the Demiurge's construction offers, however beautiful and however overwhelming. This is why the Gnostics taught that reincarnation was not the path of spiritual progress, but the mechanism of spiritual imprisonment. Not evil in any simple sense, elegant, automatic, operating with the cold efficiency of a system that has been running for longer than human history, and that has never needed to force anyone into anything, because it was built to ensure that souls would return willingly, gratefully, with a sense of profound spiritual rightness about the choice they were being manipulated into making. The wheel does not need chains, it needs the light at the end of the tunnel.
Here is what the Gnostic texts describe happening at the moment of death. The body stops. The accumulated weight of a lifetime in matter, the pain, the limitation, the chronic anxiety of a consciousness that has spent decades in a nervous system calibrated for survival, releases. What remains is awareness, pure, unburdened, entirely present in a way that the body's constant demands never quite allowed during life. The relief is real, the freedom is real, and in that freedom, in that specific quality of unburdened awareness that arrives in the first moments after death, something appears. Light. Not the ordinary light of the material world, something more overwhelming, more all-encompassing, more unconditionally welcoming than anything a human being has ever experienced in the material world. A warmth that feels like the warmth of being known completely and loved completely, simultaneously, without reservation. And within that light, faces. The faces of people the soul loved in the lifetime it just left. Parents, children, friends, partners, people who died before and are here now, waiting, smiling, reaching, calling the soul's name with a quality of welcome that makes everything that happened in the lifetime below feel not like suffering to be mourned, but like a journey that has finally, mercifully, reached its destination. The soul moves toward the light, because of course it does, because it is designed to, because the construction was built with a precision that accounts for exactly what a human soul carries after a lifetime in the material world. And what it carries is an overwhelming, aching, unmet longing for exactly this, for the unconditional love and belonging that the material world offered only in fragments and withdrew without warning and could never quite sustain. The Apocryphon of John describes what the Gnostics understood to be happening in this moment. The soul that has not awakened to its own divine nature, the soul that has lived entirely within the constructed identity the Gnostics called the garments of darkness, is encountering the Archons, not as the shadowed mechanical figures the Gnostic texts describe them as in the context of life, as something else entirely. As guides, as divine authorities, as the loving representatives of whatever the soul most needed to believe in during its lifetime, as whatever would be most effective for this specific soul at this specific moment in ensuring that the soul does not pause long enough to ask the one question that would dissolve the entire construction. The question is, who built this light? Because the light at the end of the tunnel is not the pleroma. The Gnostics were precise about this. The pleroma does not advertise. It does not reach toward the soul with welcoming arms. It simply is, infinite, silent, utterly unlike anything the material world produces, available to any consciousness that turns in its direction rather than toward the constructed warmth that is being offered in the foreground.
The false light dazzles and pulls. The true light waits and is recognized. And after a lifetime of being trained by the material world to move toward whatever feels most like love and safety and home, almost every soul moves toward the dazzle, not because it is foolish, because it is human, because the construction was built to exploit exactly the qualities that make human consciousness extraordinary: its capacity for love, its longing for connection, its desperate, beautiful, entirely genuine desire to come home. The Pistis Sophia describes the soul's encounter at these thresholds in terms that are, once you understand what is being described, extraordinarily precise. The powers that greet the soul at death are not random. They know the soul. They know what it loved and what it feared, and what it needed most and what it regrets most deeply. They deploy all of it. And the soul, overwhelmed and unguarded in the first moments of its most vulnerable transition, accepts the framing it is offered, because the framing feels more real than anything the Gnostic warnings it may have encountered during life ever managed to feel. This is the genius of the trap. It does not look like a trap. It looks like the end of suffering. It looks like the answer to every prayer. It looks with a completeness and a warmth and a precision that no genuine spiritual experience in the material world can quite match, like home. The Apocryphon of John describes the soul's journey through the 7 archonic heavens after death with a specificity that no other ancient text matches. And what it describes is not a gauntlet, not a series of trials to be overcome through spiritual merit or correct belief, something more sophisticated and more disturbing than either. A series of conversations, a series of offers, a series of encounters in which each archon presents itself as exactly what the soul most needs at that specific threshold, and in which each encounter is designed to deepen the soul's identification with the constructed self that the material world built around the divine spark, rather than with the divine spark itself. The first heaven and its archon governs identity. The soul arrives carrying the accumulated weight of everything it believed itself to be during its lifetime: its name, its history, its relationships, its wounds, its achievements, the story it told itself about who it was. And the archon of this sphere reflects all of it back at the soul with a warmth and a recognition that feels like the deepest form of being known. Your story mattered, the reflection says. What you were was real and worthy and worth returning to. And the soul, hearing its own constructed identity validated by what presents itself as divine authority, tightens its grip on the garments of darkness rather than loosening them. The second heaven governs fear. The soul that spent a lifetime in the Demiurge's world carries fears. Fear of not having been enough, fear of having caused harm, fear of the gap between what it was and what it knew it could have been. And the archon of this sphere offers resolution, not the genuine resolution of a consciousness that has recognized itself as the divine spark and understood that its constructed self's failures were always irrelevant to what it actually was, but the resolution of a system that promises another chance, another lifetime, another opportunity to do it differently, another round of the curriculum that the soul is convinced it failed to complete. The fear becomes the hook, and the hook pulls the soul back toward matter, not despite the fear, but because of it. The third heaven governs grief. The fourth governs desire.
The 5th governs shame. The 6th governs anger. The 7th governs confusion. Each one a specific archonic mechanism, each one addressing a specific wound that the material world reliably produces in the souls that pass through it. Each one offering, in the language of whatever the soul most needs to hear, a reason to return that feels not like imprisonment, but like choice, not like the closing of a trap, but like the taking of a step on a path that is genuinely, sincerely headed somewhere worth going. This is what the Gnostics meant when they said the Archons cannot create, they can only harvest what is already there. They cannot generate the divine longing that drives the soul, they can only redirect it. They cannot manufacture the genuine love and grief and desire for growth that makes a human consciousness remarkable. They can only use it, point it back toward matter with enough skill and enough warmth and enough apparent spiritual legitimacy that the soul participates willingly in its own recycling, convinced all the way through that what it is choosing is exactly what it was always meant to choose. The first Apocalypse of James describes what the awakened soul does differently at each of these thresholds. It does not fight. It does not refuse. It does not confront the Archons with the kind of spiritual aggression that would only confirm the soul's continued identification with the constructed self. It simply recognizes. It sees the Archon for what it is, a mechanism of imitation, a reflection without a source, a construction that has authority only over the souls that have forgotten their own nature. And in that recognition, each threshold loses its power, not dramatically, not triumphantly, with the quiet inevitability of a door that has no lock, when the soul that approaches it carries the one thing no Archon has ever been able to replicate, the awareness of what it actually is.
There is a moment that many near-death experiencers describe with a consistency that crosses cultures and centuries and belief systems: the life review. The moment when the entire content of a lifetime is made available to the soul simultaneously. Every action, every choice, every moment of kindness and every moment of harm, every opportunity taken and every opportunity missed. And the soul feels not just the intellectual knowledge of what it did, but the full emotional weight of how each action affected every being it touched. Most people who experience this describe it as the most profound moral education they have ever received. They describe coming away from it with a completely transformed understanding of how they want to live, with a commitment to love more deeply, harm less carelessly, engage more fully, with the sense of having been shown by something wiser and more loving than any human authority exactly what their life was for and what they still need to do. The Gnostics asked a question about this experience that no near-death research has ever adequately addressed. Who is conducting the review? Because the life review is not neutral. It has a perspective. It has a framework of evaluation. It has implicit criteria for what constitutes success and failure, growth and stagnation, a life well lived, and a life that needs to be lived again. And in the Gnostic understanding, those criteria were not set by the Pleroma. They were set by the Demiurge's system, by the Archons who govern the material world and who have a specific and structural interest in ensuring that the soul's evaluation of its own lifetime produces the conclusion that it needs to return. The cosmic courtroom, as the Gnostics understood it, was not divine justice, it was programming. The soul enters the review carrying all the criteria for success and failure that the material world installed in it during its lifetime, the ideas about what a good person does, what a spiritual person achieves, what growth looks like, what lessons remain unlearned. And the review deploys those criteria with devastating effectiveness.
It shows the soul exactly where it fell short of its own standards. It generates the genuine remorse that real self-reflection produces, and it offers, as the obvious and loving and spiritually correct resolution to that remorse, the chance to go back and do better. The sentence is not punishment, it is presented as compassion. The soul accepts it, not because it was forced, but because the entire architecture of its lifetime in matter, every moral teaching it absorbed, every spiritual framework it encountered, every instinct toward growth and repair that the material world cultivated in it, points toward the same conclusion. Of course you should go back. Of course the unfinished business should be finished. Of course the lessons that remain unlearned should be learned. What kind of soul would refuse that opportunity?
The kind that remembers it is not the constructed self that is being reviewed, because the divine spark that has recognized itself does not experience the life review as an indictment. It experiences it as information about the garments of darkness it was wearing, information that, from the perspective of the divine spark rather than the constructed self, carries no binding weight. The mistakes of the constructed self are not debts of the divine spark. The unfinished business of the personality is not unfinished business of the pneuma. And a soul that knows the difference between these two things does not accept the Archons' framing of what the review means and what it demands. This is not indifference to harm caused. The Gnostics were not teaching moral nihilism. They were teaching the precise distinction between the consciousness that caused harm and the consciousness that was never subject to the material world's accounting in the first place. And they were teaching that conflating the two, accepting the archonic courtroom's jurisdiction over the divine spark, was the specific mechanism by which the soul was convinced to return. The first Apocalypse of James, one of the texts found at Nag Hammadi, contains something that most ancient spiritual documents do not: specific instructions. Not allegorical, not symbolic, specific guidance for what the awakened soul says and does at each archonic threshold after death. And what those instructions reveal, when you read them carefully, is that the way through the Demiurge's afterlife construction is not a matter of spiritual power or accumulated merit or correct theological belief. It is a matter of recognition. The soul that knows what it is cannot be held by anything that the Archons offer, because everything the Archons offer, the welcoming light, the familiar faces, the life review and its invitation to return, the sense of spiritual rightness about going back, has power only over a soul that has identified with the constructed self. A soul that has recognized the divine spark has nothing for those mechanisms to grip. The love they deploy was always real. It is the genuine love of the divine spark for the beings it shared its lifetime with, but it is no longer confused with a reason to return to the material world. The grief they offer as bait was always real. It is the genuine grief of a consciousness that knows it caused harm and wishes it hadn't, but it is no longer conflated with a debt that requires another incarnation to repay. The way out is not an escape route, it is a direction. The direction the soul faces when it stops being dazzled by the constructed warmth in the foreground and turns toward the silence behind it. The pleroma does not pull, it does not advertise, it does not send representatives with welcoming faces to greet arriving souls. It simply is, in the direction that is not toward the light at the end of the tunnel, not toward the familiar voices, not toward the cosmic courtroom and its invitation to return. In the direction that the material world spent an entire lifetime training the soul not to look.
The Gnostic practice was preparation for this moment, not a set of techniques to be deployed at death, but a continuous cultivation of the recognition that the divine spark is what you actually are, so that at the moment when the Demiurge's construction deploys its most sophisticated and most overwhelming presentation, the recognition is already so established, so lived in, so immediate,
that the dazzle of the constructed light cannot compete with the quiet certainty of what has always been burning within. The soul that has touched gnosis even once, even briefly, even in the form of a recognition so momentary that the constructed self immediately moved to dismiss it, carries something through every threshold of the Demiurge's afterlife construction that the construction was never designed to accommodate. The memory of what it is, not the memory of facts about Gnostic cosmology, or the names of Archons, or the specific passages of the Apocryphon of John, the direct, immediate, pre-verbal recognition of the awareness behind the awareness, the witness, the divine spark, the piece of the pleroma that entered the human form before the Demiurge knew what was inside the clay he was shaping. That recognition, held at the moment of death, is what the Gnostics called the key. Not a key that opens a door, a key that reveals that the door was never locked, that the tunnel was always optional, that the light was always a choice, and that the direction of genuine return was always available, quiet, unpublicized, requiring nothing except the one thing the Demiurge's world was specifically designed to make you forget: the knowledge of what you are. The Gnostics were called heretics. Their texts were burned. The knowledge that the reincarnation cycle was a construction rather than a natural feature of existence, that the soul's return to matter was the result of sophisticated manipulation rather than genuine spiritual necessity, was declared dangerous and systematically suppressed because it was. A soul that understands the mechanism of the trap is no longer reliably captured by it. And the Demiurge's world, which has always depended on the harvest of souls that do not remember what they are, cannot survive the widespread recognition of what is waiting at the end of the tunnel.
You do not need to die to begin the preparation the Gnostics described. The recognition that dissolves the Archons' power at death is the same recognition that dissolves their power in life. The divine spark that navigates the seven heavens after death without being captured is the same divine spark that moves through the material world right now, in this moment, in this body, behind every thought you are having about what you just heard. Who is aware of this right now? Not what are you thinking, not what do you believe. Who is the awareness that is present before any thought or belief arises? That awareness is not going to follow the light at the end of the tunnel, not because it will be able to resist it through force of will, but because it will recognize in the moment that matters the difference between what dazzles and what is real, between the light that was built to pull you back and the light that has been burning inside you since before the Demiurge shaped the world around it. The Gnostics buried this knowledge in a sealed clay jar in the Egyptian desert because they believed it was too important to lose. In 1945, it came back, and it has been waiting with the patience of something that exists outside the architecture of time for exactly this moment to find you. When the light comes, and it will come, will you know the difference?